the Tanka here. We want to thank our sponsors and donors who have supported his visit financially. We're only able to bring visiting teachers here with financial support from our members and friends, so we appreciate that. And if you're moved tonight, we have a donation box right outside the Kadampa, or you can make a donation either online or in the bookstore. Venerable George is going to be teaching on this both this Wednesday and next Wednesday. This weekend he'll be teaching the Sunday morning Dharma, and then next week he'll teach the Discovering Buddhism class on death and rebirth on Monday night. This class again on Wednesday, and then on Thursday of next week he's going to be teaching the Heart Sutra using the method of talking about how you would translate it, so it's a chance to kind of get deeply into the meaning of the words with that method. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of next week, not just a few days from now, he's going to be teaching a weekend workshop on how to meditate on emptiness. So it's been really wonderful so far, and hope you all enjoy it. Venerable George usually asks us to follow the same habit that we have with Geshe-la and pay homage to the Buddhas by prostrating along with him. But if prostrations is something that's new, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable to you, you can just stand silently. And I think that's it for now. So he should be in any minute.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. So good evening. Some of you may not have been here when I introduced myself the other night. I'm Gelong Tubchen Sultram, or Monk George. Maybe it's easier. I was ordained back in 1976. So I've heard a lot of teachings since then, and I'd like to share a little bit with you today and next Wednesday. Geshe-la had suggested this topic on the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination. So just as an introduction. So before we begin, rather than saying a lot of prayers, I'd like us just to sit quietly for a couple minutes and just to meditate a little bit. I remember the very first course I attended at the monastery in Nepal in 1974. Some of you know Dr. Nick Ribish. He just said, "Now meditate." And I didn't know what meditate was. I was looking around. So sit comfortably. Relax your body. Maybe take a nice sigh if you need to. Relax your shoulders, your neck, your back, your sacroiliac, wherever that is. And without controlling your breathing, just try to observe it. Letting go of all other thoughts and worries, all the things that are cluttering your mind. Be aware when you're breathing in, when it's changing direction, and when you're breathing out. Even though you're paying partial attention to your breathing, you may notice that a lot of your attention is still either focused on your body or on what you're going to do later tonight or something that's been occupying your mind before. Try to pull your attention away from those other thoughts, like a tortoise or a turtle pulls in its head and legs. Withdraw your attention not only away from the senses, but away from these other thoughts, and just focus on the breathing. If you've had a little success in that, even give up watching the breathing, and with one part of the mind, as though it were a spy, watch the rest of your mental consciousness. So that's to say, not your eyes, not your eye consciousness, not your ear, nose, tongue, or body consciousness, but that consciousness that knows, that thinks, that plans, that remembers. Like we were watching the breathing without controlling it, just watch the mind without following any of the thoughts within it. You can think of the mind as like a vast, clear space within which images, thoughts, feelings are appearing, emerging from the mind as dissolving back into it. Focus on the space between the thoughts, even where the thoughts are coming and going. The very nature of the mind is unimpeding them, not restricting them in any way, not providing any obstruction to them coming and going. Sometimes if thoughts are still kind of stuck in your mind, you can ask yourself, what is the nature of the consciousness that's perceiving that thought? As though the thought were an object, the consciousness is the subject that's perceiving it. As though turning your attention away from the objective thought to try to perceive the subjective mind that's perceiving it. The aim of this meditation eventually, although very difficult to do in a short time like this, is to perceive only that clearness of the mind, the thoughts having dissolved back into it, just a clean, clear, very calm mind. Within that calm state, make an aspiration, like a determination. I'm going to participate in the class tonight, not simply to accumulate some intellectual knowledge, but in listening to the teachings of the Buddha, to think that I'm listening to the actual advice of the spiritual doctor, how to really change myself, how to heal myself in a fundamental way so that I benefit myself, in being healed. And also, if just in analogy with, worldly ailments. As we're healed, we have less, we cause less problem for others. And so eventually, once we're healed, we can actually benefit them in a positive way. This is the reason for listening to the teachings. If you could motivate that, that's why I'm going to listen to the teachings. To heal myself in this fundamental way, spiritually, in order to become a better person for the sake of others. And then bring your attention back, relax. Anyone have an observation or a question about the meditation? Someone have? Oh. She was thinking she was going to ask a question. She was going to give the microphone to her, and she was going to give the microphone to her. So, did it make sense? Was anyone here? This is the first time they've meditated? Okay, you're all. Oh, okay, good. How did you find it? The reason they pass the microphone is because sometimes this is recorded, and then the recording can hear the question.
No problem.
Yeah.
Well, it's not accurate. It's not my first time meditating. I took a course about a month ago, a 7-day course, and on the 7th day, every time I meditate, since then, I feel like a circle on my head.
Ah, was that part of the meditation?
No,
not
it's just
that-
something that happens naturally now every time I do it.
Ah.
I was wondering what that means or what that is.
So I think I mentioned before, once when I was at a monastery in Nepal, and I asked my teacher, Lama Yeshe, I said that when I meditated, when I had good concentration, one half of my body, let's say my left side, would be cold, palpably cold. The other side would be very hot. And in the course of maybe 10 minutes, it would change. This side would become hot, and this side would become cold. And I said, what does that mean? And Lama laughed and laughed. He fell off the bed laughing onto the floor. He said there are many kinds of experiences that we can have as we begin to draw our mind inward. And not to get too worried, or if they're like kind of unpleasant or you're not sure, or not to get too excited if you think, oh, I'm going to see that, or I'm going to have that experience again, because they will disappear after some time. And if you're looking for them, you won't have the experience of the actual meditation. You'll be trying to duplicate something that happened before.
Well, I just want to know if it's something positive or negative, or like
I'd say positive because
chakra.
I'd say positive because there's a meditation. This area, there's a famous this expression, third eye. Did you ever hear that? So, it's not. I remember when I first went to India, there were books by this fellow named Lobsang Rampa. Did anyone read?
I've read The Three Lives and The Hermit.
Okay, by Lobsang Rampa?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you probably, you have some, maybe that's why you're doing that, because he wrote one called The Third Eye, as though there was an eye here. Actually, there's something related with subtle meditations. Maybe it's just an artifact of you having read those books, or maybe in previous life you did these more sophisticated meditations, and there's some imprint in your mind that's sort of, so we don't know what we did in the past right now. I assume you're not highly, high-level bodhisattva who remembers your past lives, but you might be. In one, like we look at each other, we look like strangers, some people you might know a little bit. From the Buddhist perspective, just to be in this room together means that we've created some collective actions in the past, collective karma. There's no way that we could be here together as a group unless we'd all met together sometime in the past. Maybe in some positive way to now experience this collectively in maybe somewhat positive thing, positive way, instead of being collectively burned in ovens like the Nazis burned the Jews and the Auschwitz and things, not collectively experiencing some wild, abandoned, lustful experience, or rave or something like that, but just sitting here comfortably trying to train our minds. And we don't know what we did in previous lives. You may have imprints to Buddhism might click with you. There might be some aspect of it that you'll find beneficial. So if there's anything that you hear that you find beneficial, feel free to integrate that into whatever practice you have, whether you're a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim or an atheist, whatever. You can become a better Christian, Jew, atheist. That's good. Okay. So the topic for these two times is the two subjects, the Four Noble Truths and the 12 links of dependent origination. I'm not sure, is that how it was written or dependent arising, did you say in the?
No, dependent origination.
Okay, good. So, the very first teaching that the Buddha, when I say the Buddha, referring to the historical Buddha who lived some 2,500 years ago, the very first teaching that he gave was a teaching, sermon you can say, called he taught the Four Noble Truths. So sometimes people get the impression that these truths are somehow, I don't know, when you say noble, like, I don't know, they're better or something like that. One way of understanding it is that the word noble is English translation of an Indian word, Arya, Sanskrit word Arya. I don't know if you've heard. It seems like to be a popular girl's name these days. Do you know anyone named Arya? You? Yeah, I know some people. No? Did you say yes? No. Oh, okay. Okay, sounds good. Mm-hmm. Arya is Indian word that means superior, or you could say noble. So the people that came from maybe the Caucasus area, maybe 1,500 BC or earlier, into India, they were a new race that came in. They rode horses, and they considered themselves to be superior to the people that they were encountering. So they refer to themselves as Aryas, superiors, or nobles. When we talk about different kinds of royal houses in Europe and so forth, we talk about the noble men and noble women and so forth, kind of that sense. At the time of the Buddha said, one doesn't become noble or superior by being born to a particular family, having a particular complexion, by these kinds of things, or wealth or anything like that. One becomes noble by elevating one's mind, having a mind that sees reality as it actually is, maybe being, what would we say in the West, being mature, being wise. So those beings who've seen these so-called Four Truths directly, I don't mean with their eyes, I mean experiencing them directly, those beings are called superior beings, Arya beings. So the truths in question that they're contemplating are called truths for the Aryas, truths for the superior beings, truths for the noble beings. And then you can just shorten it, noble truths. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what happened? So when the Buddha was around, he achieved this special insight after a long search, studying with the best masters of the time. He'd left his home when he was about 29. I was just telling that to the folks who drove me over here. I remember when I first took the first Buddhist ceremony in the monastery refuge, I was 29 years old, and I was thinking, oh, I'm so old to meet the Dharma. And then I read that Buddha left home when he was 29. I said, there's still time. So I shaved off. I had a beard and long hair. I shaved that off. So he left home when he was 29. He went to study with the best scholars of the time that had philosophical systems explaining how to escape from suffering, how to find peace of mind. But he wasn't satisfied. He didn't feel they really brought the full picture. And eventually he went off with 5 friends, 5 disciples that he had traveled with. Actually, they were part of his father had been a local king in Nepal. They were part of the wise men, or his cabinet. They were all 5 of them had been around when he was born, when the Buddha was born. They spent 6 years in very strict meditation, and finally he at first he'd given up the royal life. He'd gone to the extreme of incredible asceticism. Even there is a statue in Pakistan, in one of the museums there, of the fasting Buddha. Is that, anyone know of what I'm talking about? Looking totally emaciated, living on just a little berry a day. So he's gone from extreme of the princely life to a life of extreme asceticism. Finally, he settled on even on that plane between the extremes of hedonism and asceticism. He settled on a middle way, taking food just as a medicine, not giving it up completely, not torturing his body. And he had a special insight, and was recognized as having solved this problem. He had a special insight of realizing the actual nature of the self. At first, he was hesitant to teach anyone, and he spent 7 weeks in the area where he attained his enlightenment. It's called Bodh Gaya in India. And eventually he went in search of these 5 beings that he had meditated with. And the very first thing he taught them was this doctrine, the Four Noble Truths. So what are the Four Noble Truths? So there is what's called the truth of suffering, the truth of the origination of suffering, or you could say the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, or cessation. Do we use that word very often in English, cessation? Where do we use it in common language? What do you say? You were nodding your head. Yeah, you're going. No, you. No, this lady, yeah.
Cessation, it could be anything, especially nowadays.
Yeah. Okay. But you know, it's because there's some words that are not so much part of our common vernacular, but we know what cessation is. Were you going to?
We say cessation hostilities.
Ah, okay, yeah, okay, good example. So it's part of our vernacular, a little more, not kid language, end of suffering, cessation of suffering. And the fourth truth is the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. They don't leave off the last part, just the truth of the path. And the path here doesn't mean a physical road or path, like, someone hawking tickets, to the entry to the path to enlightenment or something like that. The path is referring to a mental pathway that leads you to a destination, various mental states that lead you to better and better states. So the first thing he did, the way that he taught and we'll go over this in more and more detail, it's like, to understand it sometimes it's like unpeeling an onion, peeling an onion, peeling an onion. Unpeeling an onion would be putting the peel back, I guess. Peeling an onion, So just to give it a little view first of all, then go in a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper, okay? The first thing that he said to these 5 friends, he said, "This is suffering," pointing to himself. And just even then, there was a little bit of, because they had, like I said, we all have some connection from previous lives. Even though we may not know it, we must have met together, even as a group. This very same group, sometime in the past, who knows, in some spiritual connection. So these 5 disciples and the Buddha had that kind of spiritual connection over many, many lifetimes. They had practiced spiritual path together. So even at that point, there was some kind of, whoa. I learned in Washington, D.C. from one of the younger people. Do you ever go like that? What vocalization goes with that? Mind-blowing. You don't go, wah. So this is suffering. What did he mean? You know, sometimes I've read over the years a lot of college textbooks or high school textbooks that try to give a little synthesis of Buddhism, and they talk about this first insight of the Buddha, the first truth, the truth of suffering, is so the Buddha said, life is suffering, you know, like, as though, okay, maybe at that time that was a big insight, but we 21st century people, that's not something so insightful. That's kind of like some of the textbooks would say. But what he was saying was everything that we experience in our lifetime is unsatisfactory. You could sit or just say suffering. You might argue. You say no. There are sunsets. There's what do you like? Peanut butter. There's chocolate. There's sensual, sexual joy. There's power. There's all sorts of happy things. From the perspective of an Arya being, a superior being, a noble being, all of these things that we experience in our lives are what are called contaminated happiness. Even the happiness is called contaminated happiness. It can't be sustained. It's not something that will satisfy us. It's as though we experience something and then we don't have to experience it again because we had it. We always need it again and again. It's not really satisfying in that sense. You might say it's satisfying at the time. You know, you have a pizza, you eat several pieces, someone says, "Do you want more?" So I'm satisfied. But the next day, next week, you want pizza again, right? So it's not satisfying in that sense, long term. The Buddha mentioned that there were 3 kinds of suffering. The obvious suffering that we know and call suffering, even animals realize as unpleasant, being stung by a bee, being beaten, hearing harsh words, losing our friends, the people that we love, people rejecting us, criticizing us. There could be physical pain, physical suffering, or mental suffering. Which do you think is more long-lasting and debilitating? Physical pain, physical suffering, or mental suffering? Anyone think physical pain is more?
Debilitating?
Pardon?
Debilitating?
Yeah, that make you, like you can't do anything. Is that the right word, did I say? Debilitating? Yeah. So most people recognize that between bodily suffering and mental suffering is much more fundamental, much more problematic, say, instead of debilitating. It causes long-term, harder to get rid of because it's in our mind. Maybe there's some physical pain that we might have for many, many years, and we die with that pain. But the real problem is our mind not coming to grips with that. There's an incident in the life of the Buddha when he had his group of monks after many years. At one time he took the aspect of being sick, having a fever. He was lying down and some of the monks were putting cold compress, cooling him. And they said, "How do you feel?" And he said, "They're great." Sort of like, look in the Bible, someone talking in the third person, kings talking about themselves in the third person. He said, "There are great waves of pain coursing through the Buddha's body, but his mind is at ease." So it's like, I'm feeling not so well, but my mind is at ease. Is that possible? What's your experience? How could that be?
Well, you could be at peace with, it's probably more difficult, but it's possible to be at peace, your mind to be at peace, even if your body is not necessarily at peace.
There are some people nowadays that when they get sick and they have these illnesses and the medications they've taken for a long time no longer are functioning, they become despondent and they have no way of having that state of mind. But it is possible from a meditator's point of view to just watch that suffering and take your attention away from it. And as you take your attention away from it, it can start to become less apparent to the mind. It'll still be there, but your mind can be at ease, and you can use that. Like say someone who saves their child who's had a car fall on them. There's stories of a mom or a father, their child is working on the car and it falls down on them. And they can even muster up some strength to pull it up, and maybe with great pain, but that mother or father's mind is very happy at that moment, even though their body might be in great pain. So it's possible. So that was the first kind of suffering. We were just talking about the first truth, the truth of suffering. That's what's called suffering of suffering. There's an Indian word for suffering, dukkha. Have you ever heard that word? Dukkha? Some of you, yeah? Dukkha. I taught an Indian man. His father had been the Maharaja of Kashmir, whereas Dr. Karan Singh in India. And I taught him meditation once a week for more than a year, and in Delhi many years ago. And after one of the sessions, he rose and it looked like he was displeased. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Oh, you Buddhists, they're always talking about dukkha, dukkha, suffering, suffering." He said, "We Hindus want to talk about sukha, which means bliss. Dukkha, it sounds, almost written the same, dukkha, sukha." I told that to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and Rinpoche laughed. Very funny. So that's called dukkha, dukkha, suffering of suffering, or the unsatisfactory nature of suffering. The second kind of suffering is what we ordinarily call pleasure or happiness. I could use the word pleasure for physical pleasure and happiness for mental pleasure, just so that you could differentiate, because the mental pleasure is greater. So even that is dukkha, the Buddha said. What kind of dukkha? What kind of suffering? It is what the Buddha called changeable suffering. Am I okay? Yeah. Changeable suffering in the sense that, superficial sense, that anything you experience at one moment as pleasurable in the world will eventually change into obvious suffering. What do you think? Is that possible? I remember teaching in Holland one time, and is it Den Haag? Is that how you say it? I think it's the capital, Holland. Anyone know? Do you guys know from Europe? Den Haag is the capital of the Netherlands? Okay, it doesn't matter. It was some university, and I had been asked to give a talk on mental development. It was a course many, many weeks on development, social development, economic development, all sorts of development. So my unit was the lecture I was going to give on mental development. And I remember telling them this, that what we call happiness is actually the nature of suffering. And there was one gentleman who stood up. They were all dressed up. The men had all suit coats and ties and everything. And he said, "You don't really expect us to believe that, do you?" As though that happiness is the nature of suffering. I remember that. So what does that mean? I give example in the time, the one example the Buddha gave, many, if you're sitting in the hot sun, and you start to feel uncomfortable, you look over and you see a shady place or a room, air-conditioned room. Let's use, this more Raleigh, North Carolina example. You see air-conditioned room rather than a shady tree, and you think, oh, let me sit in the nice cool room. When you go into that room, you feel some comfort, right? At first, the suffering of the heat begins to go down dramatically, but the suffering of coolness begins to rise. While the suffering of heat is still greater, it's going down, it's still greater than the suffering of the coolness, we experience that as pleasure. It's actually kind of relief. Whoa, man. After some time, maybe you sit in there for half an hour, 45 minutes, and say the temperature had been set down to 62 or something, 64 or something. And so after a while, the suffering of the coolness is greater than the suffering of the heat that you'd been experiencing, and you start to feel, kind of wrap up, or you think, oh, let's go sit out in the nice warm sun. Okay? And it starts again. And then the suffering of the cool goes down, the suffering of the heat goes up. There's relief, until inevitably it changes into what's obviously suffering. Say again? Wow, did you hear that? Ironically, synchronistically, the heat just went on. You and I both have sensitive heads, right? You have any hair? From the Buddhist perspective, all of that which, something, maybe an exercise for you to check during this week. Everything that we experience as pleasure is no more than relief, exchanging one kind of suffering for another. You feel pleasure eating, what's the thing that people can OD on? Peanut butter, chocolate. You remember in high school or college? Or was it cheese? What are those, Cheetos or something? Look like a small finger, sort of crinkly. What do they call it? Cheetos. So, at first, some pleasure, some either chemical in the body is being reduced, so you feel some relief, but the suffering of Cheetos is going up. Right? You feel some pleasure, right? After some time, have you ever OD'd on Cheetos?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and say, take them away. I don't want to see, I'll never have another Cheeto as long as I live, but you will, of course. When the suffering of Cheetos goes up, you have to wait until that dissipates if you stop doing it. Example I've given many times with apologies to Richard Gere. Imagine, if you're a woman, imagine embracing Richard Gere. I remember teaching a seminar in Tokyo one time. I said that, and for the back of the room, I heard. Someone had very good visualization, I think. But if at first, the suffering of, when you think, example, why was this suffering to begin with that's being replaced by contact with Richard Gere, embracing Richard Gere? What was that? that came about because of perhaps looking at handsome, attractive people, beautiful people, a little bit of attachment energy arising, and like needing something to get rid of that irritation, that itch, like scratch that itch. It's not always there. If you avoid fascinating yourself with the beauty of others, that desire energy won't rise. But it's some desire energy that needs to be, that we feel needs to be itched, right? So contact with Richard Gere. But after some time, after 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours, the suffering of Richard Gere is greater. I think Richard came to one of the talks I gave in Dharamsala once. So I sort of got some tacit approval. I could use him as an example. Okay? It's like that with everything. So this is what I'm challenging you to exercise, mental exercise during the week. Anything that, all your goals in life that you might think of as pleasurable, will they really be sustainable, continual happiness, or are they just exchanging one suffering for another? When you're poor, you see the defects of that. I can't go on a trip, I can't do a retreat, I can't go to college, I don't have the money. And you accumulate money by some methods, maybe some virtuous, some non-virtuous. When you get that money, then there's the worry of losing your money, whether the bank no longer is, or you've invested it in some stocks or something, you're reading, worried about that. The very wealthy have a lot of worry about their wealth. Did you know that? Anyone here have experienced that, even with some modicum of wealth? When you have a lot of wealth, you need to protect it. You might have to build gates around your house and have guard dogs and private security and so forth. So something turns into suffering. So obvious suffering, suffering of suffering, then what we call changeable suffering, changeable dukkha. But meaning what we call worldly happiness is never of a nature that's real happiness. It's just a relief. Like when you have anyone have had a bad toothache recently, a bad pain, where you take a pain reliever, when you took the pain reliever after it kicked in, how did you feel? A little bit better. So the suffering, let's say, of the toothache or the arm or something. I had, what's it called? Lyme disease. I was going to say AIDS. I had Lyme disease. I couldn't think of the name. I had Lyme disease just a couple of months ago, and boy, at the beginning, that was so much suffering. The doctor prescribed something. I took only 3, I think, Percocet, which is, what is it called? What is it? Narcotic. I think it's half narcotic and half some opioid and Tylenol. So it's not like full. I only took a couple for a couple of days, but you could feel the suffering going down, the relief. But if you keep on taking that, at first you may not notice it. You feel some kind of need to take it again, and that suffering goes down. Like a person who is a heroin addict, we would see, they would look there and the syringe, they're taking a syringe to put into their arm, and we would feel, tell them, don't do that. That's not real happiness. To them, they just see that immediate relief, forgetting about the aftermath of that. What is it called when you're withdrawal, or an alcoholic. Someone who has a problem with attraction to alcohol, they probably said hundreds of times before they realized they went too far, and the next day they said, I'm never going to drink again, but it's very difficult to overcome that. So that's called changeable suffering, worldly happiness. Third kind of suffering is more subtle. It's what the Buddha called all-pervasive suffering. I'll shorten the name, all-pervasive suffering. That means simply still continually having a body that's susceptible to pain suffering, suffering of suffering, or changeable suffering. Right now it's kind of neutral. Like if I ask you right now, the tip of your nose, is it feel pleasant or unpleasant? So concentrate. Anyone tip of your nose feel pleasant? Unpleasant? I thought there'd be someone. Kind of neutral feeling, right? But is it possible for that tip of your nose to feel suffering? And also to feel maybe, I'm not sure, pleasure. Where would you feel pleasure on the tip of your nose? Some nice cream or something. Or maybe when you had maybe a mosquito bit you there and you put, so you're suffering of suffering, and you put some salve on it, antiseptic salve or something, and the suffering goes down. Maybe it feels relief at that time. So simply having a body that is still, and mind, body and mind, which are susceptible to suffering, even if at the present time it's not present, they are susceptible to giving rise to that suffering in the future. That's called all-pervasive suffering. Does that make a little sense? Yeah? So I will go, when I unpeel another layer, go a little more about suffering, but that's generally, the Buddha said, this is our basic situation, that life is suffering, even though that sounds to the untrained mind, to a mind that has not heard the explanation, as trivial, that is suffering. The next truth the Buddha taught was the truth of the origination of suffering, or the cause of suffering. So how does that suffering come about? Is it caused by bad luck, or just, what do people would say if they don't believe in God or karma or luck? What would they say? This is just luck, bad luck. Random, yeah, exactly. Right? That's what I was looking for. Random. From a Buddhist perspective, all of the things that we experience have causes. What are the causes of suffering? Or even worldly happiness. Remember I said worldly happiness is a kind of suffering. And even neutral feelings are a kind of suffering. Unsatisfactory state. Where do they come about? They come about from two causes. Karma. Have you heard that word? Karma. Who knows what karma means? Anyone? What goes? Who said that? You weren't in the other. I was teasing the other day because when I gave talks to high school students at our monastery or college students, I'd ask what karma means. They said, "What goes around comes around." But I learned this in Italy. I told you, you have to learn how to do this. Not moving your hand is just this. What goes around comes around. I did a little research. It seems that phrase came about from the days of the plague in Europe, the Dark Ages. If you would say, is the Black Death coming to our village? What goes around comes around. It's not so much talking about karma. To my mind, what is a better aphorism that expresses that is what is attributed to Christ in the Bible. You reap what you sow. It's very, like you create a bad action, even though right now you forget about it, no one remembers you stole, no one was there when you did it, but you plant some seed in your consciousness, eventually that will give rise to some sprout of suffering. Or even if you create good actions out of ignorance, out of believing in an ego, what we call contaminated virtue, that can arise as this worldly happiness, which is actually of an unsatisfactory nature. It's just we create the karma to have some relief. So if you've created some good karma in the past, Even to experience a cool breeze on a hot day is said to be the result of some good action you did in the past. But again, it's not real happiness, it's just replacing one suffering with another. Okay? So the actions we created in the past are the causes of suffering. And then you might, if you were sort of a scientific bent, you might want to go deeper. What's the cause of the karma? What created our actions? What do you think? You were going to...
self.
Pardon?
Attachment to self.
In a kind of in a fundamental way, but generally we would say in a little more... well, that's a good answer, but let's say what are called the klesha, Indian word. Okay, so you say, what is klesha? Karma and klesha, two causes of suffering. Klesha means not only the attachment to the self, but all of the little subsidiary states of mind that surround that. Anger, attachment, ignorance, pride, jealousy, low self-esteem, whole myriad of different states of mind that disturb our calmness, that are experienced by their very presence in the mind as unpleasant. These are what the Buddha called klesha, or you could call them delusions, although we use the word delusion in a different way in English, or afflictions, mental afflictions, disturbing mental states. And by that I mean this constellation of things like, which can be summarized as three: ignorance, attachment, and anger, aversion, hatred. They're called the three poisonous minds. So today we're going to be speaking more on the Four Noble Truths, but also the 12 links. This image with the brocade around it is a Tibetan kind of representation called tanka, T-H-A-N-K-A, we would write in English, something like that. In the very center, although you may not be able to see it, the very center circle, there are three little animals. If you project it up there, can you enlarge it to see that little center circle, or take a second to warm up or something? Okay. So there are three little images of three animals in the center: a pig, a chicken, and a snake. Is it up there? I can't see. Oh, he's got some light has to start up, isn't it? Oh, you're starting the computer, I see. It wasn't so much the light was starting out. So these three animals represent, from what, I forgot your name, the gentleman who said that before. What's your name? Jeff. What Jeff said, the attachment to the self, kind of fundamental kind of thing. As a result of grasping to the self, I don't know if you enlarge it, you may not be able to see. Oh, you can see a bit. So right here is a snake. Here there's a pig, I think. And here there's, jumping around. There we go. Although I can't tell very much. It's supposed to be like a chicken. Oh, here it is. Here's the chicken, I guess. Chicken, pig, snake. And they're kind of coming out, all of them in a sense coming out of the mouth of the pig, because the basic problem, as Jeff had kind of implied, is a fundamental kind of ignorance of our self-being. We say grasping to the self. As a result of that, we generate attachment. As a result of that, we also generate hatred, anger, aversion. And we develop low self-esteem, feeling yourself to be inferior, or pride, just the opposite. We develop jealousy and paranoia and a whole myriad of constellation of different problems. So it's as though the Buddha is giving, like a doctor. When you first go to see a doctor, is Dr. Brown here? Yeah. So when people come first, maybe they have some problem, but they don't know what is exactly wrong. The doctor might say, you have cancer, or you have, measles, or something. That's kind of identifying the suffering, the first one. And then if you know that's serious, you say, whoa, what's caused this? And you say, well, it's, because you came in contact with some people who weren't vaccinated, or, a genetic mutation or something for cancer or whatever. You might seek out what the cause of that was, cause of suffering. Sometimes people might be hesitant to believe the correctness of the Four Noble Truths, saying, generally, well, between the two, a cause and its effect, what comes first? Do effects come first and then their causes come afterwards in time? Who thinks effects come first? I'm teasing. Causes come first and their effects come later, right? So sometimes people say, well, Buddha made a mistake. He should have given the cause of suffering first and then the suffering afterwards, right? Second noble truth should be the truth of suffering. Have you heard that argument before?
Yeah.
So what is the, how would one refute that qualm, that doubt? You said you'd heard that before. How would you refute that? What was the Buddha doing when he taught suffering first and the cause afterwards?
I think you need to know what the diagnosis is first. Then you know the cause.
Then you seek the cause, yeah. Something like that. It's like a doctor, like the universal spiritual doctor. The Buddha was trying to present this situation that we have in a way that people could recognize. You first realize you're suffering, then understand what the cause. The third noble truth is the fact that you can be cured from that you can cure from suffering and the cause of suffering. It's called the truth of cessation of suffering, or just the truth of cessation, the truth of the ending of suffering. So there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's a possibility of eliminating from our mind, like when we did meditation at the beginning, try to watch the nature, this clarity of our mind that's unobstructing the thoughts. Thoughts can emerge into the mind. They can absorb back into the mind. It's not as though the thoughts that you have that you don't remember now went somewhere else when you don't remember them. It's sort of like they slipped outside. They went somewhere. It's as though they absorb back into the mind. And that train always comes at a synchronistic time. Yeah. That was the bad thoughts rumbling out of your mind, absorbing back into your mind. Pardon?
If only it were so easy.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's if one is trained, it can be that easy. Even I remember in Italy one time when my teacher Lama Yeshe was teaching, and I was with Lama, and another monk, Italian monk, Lama was asking him how is his mind, his clear meditation on the clear nature of the mind, and he said, Lama, I can't meditate on the clarity of the mind. So many problems of people. And Lama looked at him and said, that's the very best time, because like when there's so many problems there, if you can learn to, you just let go of focusing yourself on the objective garbage in your mind. With some experience, having done this in meditation, let go and watch the clarity of your mind. Those thoughts, those irritations, will dissipate, and you can sometimes find in an instant some relief. I think I told also once in England, many years ago, when I went to one of the teachers there at our Buddhist center, and I was upset, unhappy about something, and he said to me, in kind of broken Tibetan English, he said, "Don't need unhappy mind. Don't need unhappy mind." He said, "You don't need to be unhappy." Because we get in the habit of following thoughts. He did this, he did that, then he did that, she did this, she left me, then she said that. If you realize that's causing you to be unhappy, but you don't need to follow those thoughts. They are just objects rising within your mind. If you take your attention away from them, they begin to subside in their intensity right now. Even if you continue to let go of them, they begin to come less frequently. It doesn't mean that you've ceased them. This is just what do you call it? Something to treat the symptom, right? Just not paying attention. You're focusing on the clear light nature of your mind. This can give us a little bit of hint that there could be a cessation of suffering if we could cause these disturbing thoughts never to arise again. How do you do that? There is a cessation. The fourth noble truth is the truth of the path. That means the path, the mental path that leads to that cessation. So how do you bring about the cessation of these thoughts, these klesha, karma and klesha that cause suffering? How can you bring about that cessation? By meditating on wisdom, by developing wisdom in your mind, not just the wisdom of life, old man or woman tells the kids, "Oh, I went through that. Don't worry, you'll find another boyfriend, another girlfriend," or you know what I'm talking about, what we call wisdom. Our elders have some wisdom, see things in perspective because they've lived life. That's kind of wisdom. But here is a kind of wisdom that's not generally able to be developed just by watching life. It's a wisdom that realizes the deep truth of who we really are. Right now, was it Jeff? Is it Jeff who's writing down there? Yeah. Oh, Gary. Gary has a sense of being Gary, right? If I were to tell Gary, that self that you are thinking right now doesn't exist at all. Gary is just a name that we give to your body and mind. It would be something in the mind that would say, "No, that's not right. I, Gary," sometimes we point, I really exist. There's a sense of some kind of findable soul. I think, I'm not sure, maybe if someone is a Christian scholar, I think it was Aquinas or one of the Christian philosophers who said there was no need to prove the existence of the soul for Christians because it was so obvious. It was just apparent. The self was there. Actually, from a Buddhist point of view, that self that was so apparent that for Aquinas or whoever it was that said that, to say there was no need to prove the soul philosophically because you could experience it, that experience of that self is the basic ignorance that causes us to experience all this suffering. This is what Jeff, right? You're Jeff. What Jeff was saying, attachment to the self. Not attachment, what it means is that the belief in that self, as though, I used to say my mantras, my prayers late at night at the monastery in Wisconsin. And there was this dog across the road that would come out and bark whenever I came out. And when he would bark, or she, when he or she would bark, there would be another dog that would bark over there, somewhere like the next farm or something, another dog over there. So I just keep on walking, and then he'd bark, and that one would bark, that one would bark. But these guys never kept on barking. They would never start, which I thought, well, maybe a little bit strange. Only when this one barked in quick succession, and I realized there's no dog over there. It's an echo. And that was an echo. It was actually devoid, my mind, there was something happening. There was an echo, but my mind was attributing to that echo some source which was a real dog, right? It was just this one's echo. Do you follow? So if I use that word, it was empty of dog, would that make sense? Devoid of dog? That's the sense. What?
Devoid of bark.
No, it was a bark. The bark was there in the sense that there is a conventional venerable condo. But our mind imagines there's something more behind there, there is some dependent arising, the bark, but we attribute to it something that's not really there. So there is something that appears to our mind like a self, like Gary, right? But our mind solidifies that. It thinks, oh, there's something really behind there. Like seeing a reflection in the door and think out of the corner of your eye, thinking there's a person over there, maybe dressed like you. Oh, there's another monk, And I said, what's he doing there? And it's seeing it's you, and you realize it's actually devoid of being another person. Make sense so far? So there's something that appears to our mind like a self, like Aquinas or whoever it was that made that statement. So obvious, so clear, compelling. We've believed for all time. But that is actually empty of the import our mind is attributing to it. There is no self there in that way. There is, when I remember I sort of corrected Venerable here, she said, there's no bark. I said, no, there is a bark. So there is a conventional self that appears to the mind, but it immediately is mixed with a sense of a findable self, and our mind believes that. So that realization, the meditation on that kind of wisdom that realizes selflessness. Here, selflessness not in the sense that we use in the world of care and taking care of people, like we might say Mother Teresa was selfless or Donald Trump is selfless. Oh, you don't say that? Okay. I have to correct, I have to be careful sometimes. I'm just joking. Was anyone offended? Bill, were you offended? I felt a little bit. I shouldn't say any political thing. So when we talk about selfless, we don't mean it like when people help others, they say, oh, they're selfless, they have good heart. Here the selfless is on the side of wisdom rather than on the side of good heart. A discriminating understanding that what has been appearing to us all this lifetime, all the times that we felt bad or we got angry that we might later feel guilty about, all of the tragedies of our life, we felt sad because someone left us. There was never a person there, the way that our mind believed, that caused that great sorrow. Understanding that in that wisdom, wow, can you imagine the kind of relief if you understood that? All of the things that you were so worried about, almost like a dream. Like when you rise from a dream, and you know, there's something that was maybe frightful, you say, oh, it was just a dream. Some relief, right? If it was something like embracing with Richard Gere in the dream, then it might be a different reaction. Oh, shucks, it was just a dream. Now I know who likes Richard Gere. What do you think? Any questions?
Not Richard Gere.
No, Richard about the Four Noble Truths. So, yes.
I actually have a question back to the Tanka you were referring to.
Yes.
In the middle, you said there's the chicken and the pig and the snake.
Yes.
Do those represent then the three poisons?
They represent, so the basic kind of ignorance that's believing in a self give rise, the first sort of expansion, manifestation of that is with respect to pleasant objects, developing attachment, desire. With respect to objects that are unpleasant, irritating, the enemy or bad food, hatred, aversion, as the young lady said. With respect to objects that don't move us one way or the other, or just out of unknowing, we'd say ignorance. So from those, they have a myriad of multiple kinds of manifestations: attachment, lust, all sorts of things. Hatred can lead to harsh words, harsh speaking, grudge, holding, not just being angry at someone for a moment, letting it go, but we do. Sometimes we hold in our mind a grudge. We plan, we smile, it's okay. Later we think, when the time is right, I'll get them, right? What is that? There's some expression, something is best served cold. Was it? Revenge is a dish best served cold. So not close to the time. You wait till they're unsuspecting or something like that. That's a manifestation of anger and resentment and aversion and so forth. And so the Buddha said there were, in a sense, there were something like tens of thousands. He said even 84,000 different mental afflictions that could have their own particular remedies, meditative remedies that you could cause them to subside, but they would still be there. The universal remedy, universal medicine that gets rid of all of our afflictions is that wisdom that sees the I that we have been believing, the self that we have been believing, we've been grasping to. To hear the word grasping has a sense of assenting. Something appears, like in a parliamentary thing, sometimes say, I assent. Do you know what that means? I agree. So it's sort of like, I go along, it's not like I'm totally invested in this, but okay, I believe that. I'm going along with that. So we go along with this self because it's appearing so real. Our mind has the habit energy of that belief, that assent, that grasping to that. So grasping not in the sense of just holding it, not necessarily holding it as like that, but just believing it. As a result of that, also we develop what's called an attitude of caring for ourselves, what we call the self-cherishing attitude, rather than caring for others, because we identify a self which really is not there. We treat it as precious, we hold it as precious, we cherish it. The same way that a mother cherishes their precious child, or father cherishes their child, or you might cherish your friends. Do you use that word cherish? Do you know what I mean? It means hold something as precious. My friends with whom I'm staying, Karen and David, Karen mentioned this afternoon, one time at her mom or David's mom's house, they spilled a glass of wine on a new white carpet or something. Probably was very precious to, was it your mom or David's mom? But but she said they were very gracious and said, oh, that's okay. So we would like to feel that way when we make a mistake. We would like other people to say, oh no, my Ming vase you broke, that's okay, I didn't use it that often, or my brand new white carpet, that's okay, don't worry about it. We would like to feel that way. So that gives us maybe the impetus to treat others in the same way. When others do something that offends us, or hurt us in some way, to have that nobility of mind, you know. Say, that's okay, don't worry. Really sincerely, not just planning revenge later. She didn't avenge that later? Okay. Yeah, okay. Good.
We just had to buy the carpet for the hall.
Yeah. So this is just a little overview of the Four Noble Truths. This is an kind of an understanding of our plight in what we call cyclic existence. Everything we experience is really unsatisfactory. It's like being in a prison but not knowing you're in the prison. It has to be pointed out to you that there's something better. I think there was a movie. Was it? That's a good example, but the one I'm thinking of is a film that was made a long time ago and remade maybe 20 years ago with Roberto Benigni. Who's Italian? It's a Good Life. Life is Beautiful? Or I thought it was A Good Life. Is it Life is Beautiful? Do you know that one?
Yeah, it's the one when he was with his son.
Right. Benigni is an Italian guy, marries the woman of his dreams. The Nazis come. This was like set at that time, and he's set with his son. The wife is off in some other prison camp, and his son and he are in this prison camp, and he keeps on telling his son, this is a game. You know, the guards are this, you know, so the son won't be sad. But he knows. He knows. It's like the wisdom. He has the wisdom that knows this is really the nature of suffering. But the child is like us. We see it as, interesting and so forth. So these Four Noble Truths kind of one way of explaining our plight. Another way, a deeper way of explaining this plight is what another teaching the Buddha gave on the 12 links of dependent origination, which we will go into more detail next time, which are exemplified by this drawing, this painting. It's about the same size as the one that's hanging, so I don't know if I could get a better, maybe I'll point over here. No, this is brighter, so yeah, works better. So the outermost, yeah, but they're not so clear because we're a pixelated image. Oh, a little bit better. So there are 12 images around here, around the outer edge. Can you count 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. These represent these so-called 12 links or 12 limbs of dependent origination. So, example, because we have this basic ignorance that believes in a self, we're sort of adding something, believing in something that's not really there, like believing that there's water in the mirage, believing that there's another monk over there but in the reflection, but when I see, it's actually empty of monk. Thinking there's a really dog over there barking, but realizing it's just an echo. It's empty of dog. That basic kind of ignorance, the first link, that creates karma, what we call karmic formation, which is, we'll see in detail next time, that is represented by a potter making pots. We create something. We call karmic formations. That leaves an imprint in our consciousness, is one of the links, which eventually leads to rebirth. Anyway, there's 12 details of this. So that method, which we didn't go over today, we'll go over more next time, the 12 links, is in a sense, is a more detailed view of the Four Noble Truths, looking at it from a different perspective, looking at our plight within cyclic existence from another point of view. And because it has the ability to be analyzed in a deeper way, it was the object of meditation of some of the brighter disciples of the Buddha. those who were his original followers, who were called the solitary realizers, or the pratyeka Buddhas. So that they're the ordinary disciples of the Buddha, like Shariputra and Moggallana and the other disciples, they were called Shravakas, hearers. They're called hearers. The word Shravaka in Sanskrit means to hear or to, what did I say? Yeah, to hear, hearers. They heard the teachings, they put them into practice, and then because of making realizations, they explained them to others and caused others to hear about these, remarkable, miraculous abilities that we might be able to develop, peace of mind, nirvana, and so forth. So we will talk about that next time, this more sophisticated understanding, the 12 links. And I want to stop a little bit early today so that we can recite the praises of Tara once to help. Our teacher Lama Sopa Rinpoche has said would be a great way to eliminate hindrances to the teachings he's going to give next year, next August, right, Donna?
Yes.
Next August. What page is it? 191 or something like that?
Page 191, yeah.
And after that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After that, we'll recite it one time. Donna will lead in English. And then we will do what's on page 198, the Praise to the 21 Taras abbreviated version. I just talked, this abbreviated version was given to Atisha. You know the story, right? What happened? No. When he had some ailment, and he was told that he had to recite the praises of the 21 Taras 10,000 times a day. Oh, you couldn't recite this. Just to recite this will take us 3, 4, 5 minutes. He couldn't have done it 10,000 times a day. So the actual female aspect of the Buddha Tara, this is being praised to, said this one verse of 5 lines that is on page 198 can substitute for the 21 praises. So he recited that 1,000 or 10,000 times a day. So we're going to recite the long prayer once and then the short one 7 times. Okay? So Donna.
Okay. From your sublime abode at Tapotala, O Tara, born from the green letter Tam, your crown adorned with Amitabha, action mother of the Buddhas of the 3 times, Tara, please come with your attendants. The gods and demigods bow to your lotus feet, O Tara, you who rescue all who are destitute. To you, Mother Tara, I pay homage. O my prostrate to the noble transcendent liberator, homage Tara, swift heroic, eyes like lightning instantaneous, sprung from opening stamens of the Lord of 3 Worlds, tear-born lotus. Homage she whose face combines 100 autumn moons at fullest, blazing with light rays resplendent as 1,000-star collection. Homage golden blue one lotus, water-born in hand adorned, giving effort calm austerities, patience meditation her sphere. Homage crown of Tathagatas, actions triumph without limit, relight on by conquerors children, having reached every perfection.
Homage filling
With Tutare, whom desire direction and space, trampling with her feet the 7 worlds, able to draw forth all beings. Homage worshipped by the all-lords, Chakra, Agni, Brahma, Marut, honored by the host of spirits, corpse raisers, Gandharvas, Yakshas. Homage with her tray and pay sounds, destroying foes' magic diagrams, her feet pressing left out right in, blazing in a raging fireplace. Homage to Re, very dreadful, destroyer of Mara's champions, she with frowning lotus visage, who is slayer of all enemies. Homage at the heart her fingers, adorn her with 3 jewel mudra. Ladre masses all excited, all directions was adorn her. Homage she so joyous, radiant, crown emitting garlands of light, mirthful laughing with Tutare, subjugating Mara's devas. Homage she able to summon all earth guardians assembly, shaking, frowning with her home sign, saving from every misfortune. Homage crown adorned with crescent, moon all ornaments most shining, Amitabha in her hair knot, sending out much light eternal. Homage she mid wreath ablaze like the unending fire abiding,
Right stretch, left bend.
Joy
turn.
surround you, troops of enemies destroying. Homage she who strikes the ground with her palm and with her foot beats it, scowling with the letter whom the 7 levels she does conquer. Homage happy, virtuous, peaceful, she whose field is peace nirvana. She endowed with Om Soha, destroyer of the great evil. Homage she with joy surrounded, tearing foes' bodies asunder. Freeze with whom in knowledge mantra, arrangement of the 10 letters. Homage Turi with seed letter, of the shapes of syllable whom by foot stamping shakes the 3 worlds. Meru, Mandara, and Vindhya. Homage holding in her hand the hair-marked moon of Deva lake form, with thy spoken Tara and Pei, totally dispelling poison. Homage she whose gods and their kings and the Kinnaras do honor.
Murdering all
Joyful splendor, she dispels bad dreams and conflicts. Homage she whose 2 eyes bright with radiance of sun and full moon, with Vaishara and Tutare, she dispels severe contagion. Homage full of liberating, power by the set of 3 natures, destroys hosts of spirits, yakshas, and race corpses supreme Ture. These praises with root mantras and prostrations thus are 21. O my prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. O my prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. O my prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. O my prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. O my prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. O my prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. O I prostrate to the goddess foe destroyer, liberating Lady Tara. Homage to Tari, savioress heroine, with Tutari dispelling all fears, granting all benefits with Ture. To her with sound Svaha I bow. And then
Yeah, that's right. So thank you very much for your attention and your good heart. We'll do this again next Wednesday. And David, it was no David, right? Then I haven't found time yet. David wanted me to give a little, couple of ideas about the 3-year retreat that I did. I finished last year, 3 months, 3 half cycles of the moon we call retreat. And he was wondering if I could talk about this. It hasn't had space yet when you were here, so I thought I'd wait. Maybe next Wednesday, we'll take a little time in the class to, if you're interested. David was it anyway. So let's just spend a moment to dedicate the merits we created this evening, what we call dedication of merits. So imagine that because we had a good motivation at the beginning, hopefully, that we were listening to this talk, participating in order to elevate our mind, to try to develop heal ourselves in some fundamental way. Like if you received a check from the income tax back, sort of dedicating it to your college fund or to your children's education or to your long desired bungalow. It's kind of like making a very strong aspiration. May these virtues, in whatever way they ripen, may they always be the cause of my continued spiritual realizations from life to life. up to and including enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. So it's just 8:34, so not too late. I hope you have a good time. Drive safely. Hope to see you next time. Tomorrow evening, for those of you who have that, for those of you who have a lot of energy, we're going to do the Guru Puja, the Lama Chopa. I'll be there, and I'll be here, sort of offerings and a lot of meditations. If you're welcome to come, if you haven't come before. Don't feel compelled to, but if you'd like to, you're welcome.